Tesla is at risk of losing its access to the Chinese market.
I 100% agree with that.
And I think that is more likely than people think. I think the next 5 years at least are going to be so unbelievably chaotic.
If you were Chairman Xi, would you allow Elon Musk to produce Optimus robots in your country to be sold in your market and to staff your security detail?
It does feel like the chaos and the uncertainty is just getting started. This is not going to end anytime soon.
We're not going to come back to the world of 2024. Global trade is never going to look like it looked in 2024 ever again. I have never been more excited about Tesla's position in respect to their mission and with respect to the execution of their core technologies. And like, we're at the very cusp of transforming Tesla as a business from a hardware, a company where hardware drives profitability to one where it is a software powered earnings machine. Like, that is potentially months away. And the implications of that for the business are absolutely bonkers. They're insane. At the same time, with all of the tariff war stuff that's going on right now between the United States and China and the reordering of the global system of trade, like, say whatever you want to say about it, we're not going to come back to the world of 2024. Global trade is never going to look like it looked in 2024 ever again. That is huge. It is majorly significant, and it creates a lot of geopolitical and macro uncertainty that is extremely, it's extremely risky. And so that's this weird place where we're at now as investors and trying to decide how to position ourselves for the future is, how do you balance this tension between macro and geopolitical risk and then the technical execution of Tesla with respect to full self-driving, autonomy. We're moving into a world where Optimus robots are probably going to be a really big deal here in the next couple of years. And the significance of that technical project is also, it has massive geopolitical implications. It has massive social implications for our culture, our society, our economy, how politics is going to evolve, how the way people put food on their tables is going to evolve. Like, all of this stuff is just getting more and more intense and hard to really, really wrap our minds around. And I am just struck by the incredible volatility that creates. That, one moment it may look like the world is ending, and then the next moment it may be that, things look like they're going better than they could ever have gone before, and that we're going to actually be able to have things from our wildest imagination when it comes to abundance. Like, this is one of those seasons of fundamental and cataclysmic change where all those options are going to be on the table, and our ability to have certainty about which one of those futures is going to play out is just dramatically reduced. We don't know what the future will bring, and we need the urgency to do everything that we can do for our part to create the awareness necessary that is the situation that we're in. B, we need to have the motivation to work hard on the fundamental problems that need to be worked on. And then C, we need to be prepared for both the pitfalls of a potentially wild upside and the risks that are facing us from an existential level if we head into something that looks a lot more like World War III. And I think all of those things are true all at the same time.
Yeah, I think what's becoming obvious to me is that I think your volatility comment is so dead on. I think the next 5 years at least are going to be so unbelievably chaotic as countries, specifically US, China, and their allies, are positioning themselves to capture the next 100 years, because all those technologies are coming to a head at the same time, and it's underpinned by artificial intelligence and the humanoid robots and automation and all that stuff. And it'd be silly, one of the big words that was dropped with our pod with Michael Dunn, the naiveness of the United States and Western nations when it comes to how other countries, specifically China, are trying to become major global superpowers, and how well equipped they are from that perspective to get that done, and the methods they employ to achieve that goal. So that and so what does that create a forcing function for? If the West is paying attention, if the United States is paying attention, that means that the brightest minds in that country will come together to try and win, whatever that means. Get themselves in a position where they can, let's say, survive whatever conflict we're about to enter, if we're going to enter, and position their companies and the countries that they operate in a strong enough position so that they can survive those moments and become stronger than ever, right? And so like companies like Tesla, like Palantir, like Nvidia, Microsoft potentially, who knows, Google, like there's a lot of companies that are going to be forced to put everything they have in order to ensure the United States and its allies are able to come out ahead in the inevitable major competition that's going to happen here in the coming months and years to see who is the global superpower. Because even if we're going towards a world where the United States and China are going to be in competition to be the two premier world powers or whatever, or Europe or whoever, by default, that's going to create competition. It's not going to be Europe. Sorry, my European friends. We're shitting on you a lot lately, but we still love you. I promise.
Hey, we're shitting on you because we're trying to tell you that you need to get your act together, get your head on straight, and realize the world that we're heading into. Because if you think that we're going back to the world of 2020 or 2024 or 1990 or 1995, you're sorely mistaken. That there is no room for nostalgia about the past. There is only uncertain outcomes that are majorly consequential, majorly positive, majorly negative. There's no in between. And that if you are not doing your utmost and getting out of your own way to prepare for that reality, you will get steamrolled. That is the reality of the situation.
100%.
And that is true for the United States, just as it is for Europe. And so this message is for anyone in the Western world, that we have got to get our heads on straight, put our head on a swivel, and act decisively if we care about, I am the first one to recognize that the United States has been a world empire. We like to come up with fun euphemisms like a hegemony or a unipolar moment. What do those things mean?
That's so funny. It's so true.
That's a fucking empire. And Washington, D.C. has been at the center of that empire for decades. And we have been assholes in many ways. There are many countries and many casualties. First and foremost, the Middle East has been a freaking just carnage for decades and decades. That is largely the result of cynicism and just absolute outright failures of United States foreign policy. And these things are human catastrophes, they're humanitarian crises, and it's awful. At the same time, the United States lives in pursuit of, not actual acquisition of, a set of ideals about basic and fundamental human rights that is unique in the world, that no other nation with its founding documents really believes that all men are created equal and that they are endowed with their, by their creator with inalienable rights. And do we fall short of that hope and that goal day in and day out? Absolutely. But the reality of the situation is also that everyone around the world knows that if you want a shot, there's only one place that you have to go. And those two things are deeply intertwined. That a nation that is fundamentally authoritarian does not give shots to outsiders. And I believe there is cultural supremacy. This is one of the reasons why, companies like Palantir are actually companies that I fundamentally believe in from a values and a philosophical standpoint. That while the West is absolutely flawed, that it is a superior set of ideals by which human societies can flourish to something that is much, much more communal and much, much more authoritarian. And so I'm not going to apologize and say that the US should not absolutely try to fight and win in a war between the ideals of the CCP and the ideals of the United States.
Yeah. This is absolutely what's happening right now. I think that's the realization. It's like that's 1000% absolutely what's happening right now. It's disguised as a tariff discussion. We can even separate out whoever is the president of the United States. This is not really a Trump thing, but this is decades of America putting itself in a position where it's going to be weaker relative to its biggest competitor. And to think that our biggest competitor is going to raise to their ideals while trying to keep our best interest in mind is insane. And so the question becomes, is the United States...
Especially when you can see the way that they treat their own people. Like the CCP's treatment of their own people. The Chinese people are an incredible and amazing people that live under a regime that surveils them to a level... I mean, obviously the United States, we surveil citizens as well.
Yeah, we're no saints. We're no saints.
We're no saints. But we don't have cameras on literally every street corner, even in the middle of nowhere. That is a signal to you that the eye of Sauron, Big Brother, is watching at all times in all places. And we don't have a social credit system. And we don't have an entire people group that we persecute the way that the CCP persecutes the Uyghurs. Like, these things are fundamentally different. Yes, we have flaws. No, none of us are running to China because we want to live there, because we think that we have a bright and shining future under the shadow of the CCP. I'm
legitimately scared. And that's maybe scared is the wrong word. No, scared would be a good word, I guess. But I do think that Tesla is at risk of losing its access to the Chinese market.
I 100% agree with that.
And I think that is more likely than people think, because you have to think about what is, if you look at the history of China's treatment of foreign automakers in their region, they are very good at welcoming them in, and then once they feel like they have what it takes to make something as good or better, they put up practices that bias towards the domestic manufacturers versus the international ones, and that's their right. That's their right to try and create forcing functions to prop up domestic manufacturing. Literally, that's what the United States is doing through tariffs, right? But they're not always the most, let's say, the most honest or the most fair when it comes to doing that, setting up those walls. I think if I think Tesla getting FSD out in China is something that China is directly interested in, because once Tesla develops the needed technology for FSD in that region, it will magically appear on every domestic manufacturer. And at that point, given that Elon and, let's say, Trump and all future administrations are going to be very friendly with each other, right? Because one has to posit that, hey, this Elon-Trump bromance, this is likely going to define the next, it's going to define Elon's relationship with government for the foreseeable future. I think, given that America is the first wholly owned American car company in China, I don't think that is long for the world, especially as the conflict continues between China and the United States in the coming months and years. This tariff thing is just the beginning. It really does feel like this is just the beginning, and so everyone has to think through the implications of, and also too is like, if China puts too much pressure on Tesla to artificially hamper their sales or whatever, or Elon feels like he's not being treated fairly in the country, he is crazy enough to just shut down the operation and bounce, potentially, or just be like, you know what, whatever, you can have it, I don't care, we'll build it somewhere else. If you look at the post that Elon put out there about the rare earth minerals, very specifically he said that they're not rare, and he said it multiple times, they're not rare, but he very specifically said that China has the refining capacity for these things, whereas the rest of the world doesn't, right? And that was sort of a very direct, pointed comment that says, yo, China, even though they have all the minerals,
we don't have to be over a barrel just because
exactly.
they have the supply chain indefinitely.
And I'm sure that's not
a solvable
something,
problem.
I don't think that's something she appreciated. I don't think so, right? Especially when maybe he thinks that he has given Elon, preferential treatment by Tesla being able to operate its own. Or the flip side scenario, the more positive scenario is, well, this is the sign of the things to come, that maybe China does want to operate more openly. Maybe China does want to bring in more American manufacturers or foreign companies where they're wholly owned by the foreign entity versus having to have a 50%, joint venture or partnership with a Chinese company or the Chinese government in this case. So
I think the signal will be whether or not Elon does anything related to the bot domestically in China. That will be the telltale sign to us whether or not he has any sort of faith about the future of Tesla in Shanghai and in China. If he does not, exactly. Humanoid robots are such an important thing.
Yeah.
If he's not willing to do that in China, I think that signals a irreconcilable difference in directions. And whether that plays out in a short period of time or a long period of time is hard to say. But yeah.
I would almost make the argument that humanoid robots are such a huge national security threat that it would be silly for any country to allow foreign company to flood their country with humanoid robots that are not made in that country. You're just you're manufacturing an army.
So what I was saying is you could make, Tesla could make Optimus bots in China and they would be made locally. But
that's true.
Yeah, would you allow, as if you were Chairman Xi, would you allow Elon Musk to produce Optimus robots in your country to be sold in your market and to staff your security detail?
It seems like if I'm China, I'm like, knowing how they like to operate their country, allowing Tesla to make their humanoid robots there seems like something that is impossible for Elon to achieve and Tesla to achieve. It feels like just such a giant national security threat. It's like we're literally talking. I mean, and you could make the same argument about self-driving cars. You could say, Tesla operating FSD in China, what's stopping them from? And then again, maybe this is where we're overthinking everything. Is like maybe, what's stopping the United States in partnership with Elon, in partnership with Tesla, to turn every self-driving FSD into massive tools for destruction. Just have them crash into the most important things in China that that will damage the country as much as possible. Just have every car crash into every power station. I don't know. Just go around and just mow down people. Like us as an American company, but this is where maybe again doom and gloom thing. Like we have to recognize the absolute risks that we're facing. And we're facing big risks, but I think it's also important to keep within context. Like, hey, maybe there is a mutual shared outcome here where all parties benefit. And could it escalate to Chinese warships surrounding Taiwan, and you would have like a Cuban Missile Crisis type deal, where we get to the brink of like true, actual, physical World War III, and then it comes to a head, and we're like, okay, this is how we're going to move forward, and then everything retreats, and then the world can continue to be peaceful for a little while longer, maybe. But it does feel like the chaos and the uncertainty is just getting started. This is not going to end anytime soon.
Yep.
And recording.